we're gonna continue with part 4, and part 4 is the main topic is going to be how to overcome the fear of losing. It's a slightly shorter presentation because it's a lot less crazy in-depth material compared to the earlier ones where we had to delve through a lot of biological information and a lot of basically going back to college, right? So this one is a little bit more practical. We're going to look at some practical examples, and then after that I want to give some room to maybe look at some personal cases if people are up for that, because I think it's very interesting to look at a case by case perspective, because that makes it a little bit more personal, and that way you're able to help people individually. What's up, Codefire? I hope all is well. Good to see you here today. Let's see. So before we start, are there any questions so far that we have to cover? Or no questions? No questions yet. That's also fine. Okay. I think there was no questions. So we'll just start off. So first of all, we're gonna start with adaptation. Adaptation is the first step to overcoming the fear of losses, right? And in this case, we're specifically looking at when people are fearful of losing and therefore they are very scared to open trades, right? Because the different problems in trading, they all end up project themselves in different ways, right? Some people they have severe over trading, so they take a million trades a day, so to say, and other people they are very scared to take a trade, right? And just being fearful of losing can basically end up both ways. Either you overtrade even though you're fearful of losing, or you barely trade because you're fearful of losing, right? So that's the weird thing with it, right? It can basically project itself in two completely opposite ways. And today we're going to focus on the first one. And if people are interested, we can also go over the second one in the next stream, and I'll make sure to prepare for that as well. So let's start with it, right? Adaptation. We got to adapt to basically overcome the fear of losses, right? And we have found that fear is a response. The fear response is a reflexive reaction to a threat, right? That's something we went over in last presentation. That every fear is a reaction our brain does instinctively to a perceived threat. However, this reflex has a property to fade if we constantly contact the source of the threat, right? And this property is used in cognitive behavioral therapy for example, anxiety disorders, or I don't know, other phobias or things people might be scared of, right? And usually it's called like exposure therapy, right? The more you expose yourself to something, the less scary something will be. So let's look at an example, right? Imagine that we're dealing with a fear of public speaking. Has anyone ever had that back in high school, back in elementary school, that you had to do like presentations for a whole class and you were kind of nervous, you kind of didn't like it, all that kind of stuff? I'm sure there's going to be multiple people in here that have that. I had it too when I was like, I don't know how old I was, but when I was way younger and still like in like the first years of high school, I was very nervous speaking up in front of class. I would speak very fast. I'd try to finish everything as fast as possible, and I didn't like it. But look at me here now. There's 34 people in here, which is basically a whole class, and I have no problem with it. I enjoy it nowadays, right? So it's a little bit of exposure therapy for me. So let's say we have someone that has this, that fear of dealing for public speaking, right? And this is a stress that causes an avoidance reaction, right? We start to avoid it. And in order to overcome the phobia, we must intentionally and gradually begin to contact the threat. So what that means is the only way we can basically deal with that phobia or deal with being scared of public speaking, we have to do it actually, and that's the only way you'll be able to overcome it eventually. You have to slowly get in contact with the threat, and that will make sure you'll grow over it eventually. So, to begin, we have to immerse that person with the fear of public speaking in a very safe environment, right, and very comfortable environment. Um, yeah, there should be audio. Let me know if anyone also has problems with audio. Otherwise, you have to restart maybe, or uh, if someone can tell him to restart, of course. Okay, good to hear it's clear to everyone. So, as I said, the way to start with this is to, um, ooh, also audio problems. It's the strange thing is it's Discord specifically because I know the audio is fine on other channels. There's just stages are sometimes a little bit glitchy for some reason. Um, for example, I started the stage, no one heard me. I restart the stage, and suddenly 90% of people can hear me. I think if I restart it again, maybe everyone will hear me, but we're not gonna risk it. Uh, Next thing you know, no one can hear me again. So as I said, to begin, we have to immerse that person with public speaking in a very safe environment that's very comfortable, right? As safe and comfortable as possible in that situation, right? In which he could perform in front of, like, let's say it's one person, right? And this could be, for example, your best friend, maybe, right, or your wife or your husband. Um, and then we will expand the audience to several people, and so on and so on and so on, and that way we gradually increase the stress that will be caused in the nervous system, right? So it can adapt smoothly and decrease the reactivity of its reaction, right? So we slowly but surely introduce more and more of the threat to the person until he basically overcomes it as a whole. Oh, good to hear you can hear me now. Perfect. So, as I said, this method in cognitive behavioral therapy is called exposure therapy, right? And our task is to face our fear gradually and systematically. And we can easily implement this method in the context of trading because when we have, we are facing a fear about opening a position, instead of avoiding it, right, we're going to consider opening a comfortable position with a safe amount of volume, right? For example, let's say usually we have in our plan and we have learned that we should take 1% risk per trade, right? But let's say we still have that very, very bad anxiety and very strong fear of losing that 1%, right? Basically, at that point, it means that 1% is worth to us it's worth something to us, right? It's important to us to not lose that 1%. So if we're not fine with losing 1% and that's too heavy for us, what about 0.25? Right? Maybe that's fine. Maybe we don't experience the same amount of stress with the full 1% as with the 0.25%, for example, right? So what we can do to basically adapt to this and basically build a system to slowly adapt and slowly get rid of that deep rooted fear is to start trading with a lower amount of volume first, right? Or risk. Let me put it like that. And then once our body no longer perceives this as a threat and our body responds very normally, we can slightly move it up to 0.5 and see how our body reacts, right? Maybe maybe at first it will be a little bit, um, nerve wracking because you're making the step to up the risk. That could be a very psychological barrier, could be, but at the same time, it's probably something we're gonna get used to pretty quickly, right? Compared to if you go from 0.25 all the way to 1% immediately. So we make gradual steps all the way until we get to that 1%. Discord is very unreliable with audio lately. Yes, it definitely is. Yeah. Exactly. And finding that risk comfort threshold. Exactly. And there's a side note I want to give with this, right? Because this is just purely something like this is purely an exercise to get rid of this specific fear, right? This is by no means a way to say, okay, everyone should trade 0.25, right? Because let's say you're not somebody that's experiencing that loss of or fear of losing, right? And you are very comfortable with trading 1% risk, going all the way to 0.25 can actually have an adverse effect. It can actually be more your downfall, so to say, than it can help you sometimes, right? So it's a very case specific application. And why would it be something, or could it be something negative if, let's say, you do not experience that fear at all? And well, let's say 0.25 in the eyes of the person that is very comfortable with 1% feels like, oh, that's nothing. It's only 1/4 of what I'm used to, right? So what could happen, I'm not saying this is gonna happen, but something that just could happen is that the person then starts to think like, oh, this is not a lot of risk. This is almost nothing for me. So instead of being scared to lose, it's the opposite. They don't care about losing it, right? And that's where a new problem can arise. Because if you do not care about losing it anymore, most likely what's going to happen, the end result of that is, in this specific case then, right? It's that people might take trades that do not fit their system, or they are actually taking trades they should not, because, they're basically not losing anything anyway, because it's only 0.25% compared to the full 1%, right? So they kind of feel like, I could take 4 losses and then I'd have 1 loss, right? Because they're used to 1%. So that's a little bit of a barrier to take care and to take in mind, right? So the idea is to replace the avoidance, back to the whole fear of losing. The idea is to replace avoidance with a safe risk for you, right? So in that case of a loss, you do not feel any significant consequences. And the task at hand is then to launch the adaptation, right? So we have the fear of losing, we have avoidance, then memory gets stored, and then we struggle to open a position, right? This is basically the sequence that happens in our brain. We have avoidance, the memory gets stored, then our brain connects the dots with memories of before, and then we struggle to open a position because we're fearful of losing. Then we avoid it, and then the memory gets stored again, and then we have like an endless cycle that repeats itself, and that's not quite helpful to our trading. Let's say what some people say. You find more comfort in taking less valuable setups. Exactly, that's the thing. Yeah, I see that taking a trade that's not in your setup with normal risk brings on more fear, but when it's within your setup, it may not bother you. Also true. You can also be found when switching from minis to micros. Yeah, exactly. That's what you see often if people trade minis on a 50K account, for example, and they switch to minis or micros. Sometimes it happens that people are less careful with what they're doing because it seems more. It seems like it's less, right? It seems like it's not anything. So every time you follow this chain, right, your behavior model will become stronger in your memory, right, through the mechanism of long-term potentiation. And let's imagine that a specific behavior model is responsible for a specific network of neurons in the brain, right? If you constantly use this behavior model, then accordingly to this, this network will be constantly activated, right? And activation occurs through the release of the neurotransmitter glutamate, it's called, from one neuron, which affects specific receptors of another neuron, basically. And when these glutamate constantly activates these receptors, a different part of receptors are also activated, and this triggers a cascade of reactions that ultimately strengthen the connection between neurons, right? And so basically, it's the more the network is being used in a way, or the more this network will be activated, the stronger the connection between neurons will be eventually. And the stronger the connection between those neurons, the easier it is to activate the neural network and basically cause behavioral response, right? So the more it happens, the more easy it will be for your body to have the behavioral response, right? So you see where we're going with how this can even become more problematic over time, because it basically, the neural reaction is strengthened over time, right? And this is something normal in our body because it works the same way with other stuff, right? If we're trying to learn something and we do something over and over and over again, repetition, we get used to it and stuff starts to be, like a habit, right? Um, if we have a very normal habit, which is, for example, brushing your teeth, if you do it every day, it's going to feel very weird to not do it in the morning, right? And that's something I saw in a Chris Williamson podcast, I think, and he had it from someone else. I don't know where it came from, but he basically said, I think it's from Atomic Habits, and he said, if you forget a habit uh, one day, it's just forgetting it. If you forget it twice in a row, it's the start of a new habit, right? And that's kind of also same here, right? If you start to switch up the pattern, you're able to break the response in that chain. Taking a loss and trying to fight the tilt from doing, it happens so often with people. What's good, Alden? Good to see you here. Hope all is well with you. We're talking about the fear of losses today. Just got home from the gym. That's nice. What did you train today? What did you hit? Upper body? Nice. I have a rest day today, and tomorrow we're gonna kill leg day. Let's see. So, as I said, the stronger the connection, the easier it is to activate the neural network and therefore cause behavioral response. So, the more often you will react to certain life situations in a certain way, the more likely it is you will use the same reaction in the future, right? The conclusion from this is quite primitive, right? Avoidance is an understandable reaction in response to fear. And the more often you react to the fear of losses by avoiding them, the more likely you are that you will do it again the next time. So, in order to defeat that fear, you need to systematically face it and not avoid it, of course. So, just as it is impossible to get rid of the fear of heights standing on the ground, it's impossible to get rid of the fear of losses without opening positions. Kind of makes sense, right? So, what is a way that we can basically measure this in a systematic way, right? Because we have the risk management approach where we slowly get ourselves some exposure therapy, right? And then we also have a different method, right? Which is a table of expected and actual anxiety. So we already know that the potential opening of a position can cause us to feel anxious, right? Because it's already linked in our brain that opening a position can lead to anxiety. And anxiety is aimed at mobilizing the organs and systems of the body to fight a threat, right? And in a state of anxiety, people overestimate the likelihood of negative events, right? Because our body kind of prepares for a semi worst case scenario, right? And same thing with traders. This will prompt traders to avoid opening position even if all criteria have been met of their trading strategy, right? It might be a perfect A plus setup, but people will still avoid the system or still avoid the trade just because their brain tells them to, right? Because they're scared to lose the trade, they're scared of opening it in the first place, right? And in psychotherapy, there's a technique aimed at showing that very often our anxiety has no objective basis at all, right? And this technique is implemented in the form of a specific table that we can make. In this table, we have 4 things that we have to measure, and I'm gonna put up TradingView just so we can basically recreate the table on our own. Let me switch the screen really quickly. There we go. We're able to see TradingView now, right? Type a 1 in the chat if TradingView is visible. Perfect. So, this table consists out of 4 parts. 1 is the problem. 2 is the expected anxiety. 3 is the emotions. 4 is the actual anxiety. Right? So we make a table, and this could be done in Notion, for example, right? Or you can do it in Excel or any sort of program that allows you to make tables that you prefer. There we go. A nice little table. And then we put above it problem, expected anxiety, emotions, and actual anxiety. So in this section, in the problem section, we describe a situation that causes anxiety, right? Can be any negative situation, and most often in trading, it will be the anxiety and fear of opening a position, right? So we could write something like all criteria of the trade are met, but somehow I am still fearful of opening a position, right? So we write that in the box right there. And before we take a trade, we basically fill in, let's say, between a scale of 1 to 10 or 0 to 100 or whatever scale you'd like to use, the anxiety that we expect up front, right? You're still fearful of opening a position. And right now, maybe you feel a 7 out of 10, right? So you fill in, for example, 7 out of 10. Then you're going to force yourself to actually take the trade, right? The exposure therapy, you're going to open it. And you're going to write down the emotions that you feel during the trade and after it, right? Let's say you took the trade. It was a decent trade. You held it and you took one take profit and the rest ran to break even, for example. So you ended up with a net 1-on-1 RR. Perfectly fine, right? So you write down, I was worried while holding, but still got a TP in. And the rest went to B, right? And then you can write down how you feel, right? And then, most importantly, you write down what the actual anxiety was, right? How did you feel? And then overall, you were like, at the end, it's like, kind of wasn't so bad after all, right? And then you start to basically get that realization of, it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, right? And maybe it's like, it was actually kind of a 3 or a 4, right? It wasn't that bad. Maybe it's just a 3, right? Oh no. Right? This way you can kind of keep track in trading of how you have an expectant anxiety and an actual anxiety. And because it's subjective data, right, over time, you can basically literally tell yourself, look, there's no reason I should stress out. Every time I take a trade, I end up to, having way lower actual anxiety compared to what I expect to have, right? And the first and second columns are tables you fill out before taking action, right? These two. And the third and fourth, so these two, are filled out after. And usually this is something that will happen over and over again. It will usually look like this. And this is due to the fact that people constantly overestimate and exaggerate a problem. In this case, opening a position. And then your task is to evaluate the results of, keeping the table over some period of time. And there's two things you should pay attention to. How much does the real level of anxiety correspond to the expected? And how do the results of your trades correspond to the expected real anxiety? Right? It's also very important to keep track of. Because sometimes, in some situations, the actual anxiety will correspond to your assumptions, right? And it happens, and it's completely normal. Because still, sometimes the threat, quote unquote, is still real. And that's why it's important to evaluate the results of the table at least over a short period of time and not to like just one or two trades. So, maybe you find this useful if you are having this specific problem. And because of this, any trading decisions, they can be statistically tested, right? You can write your entire or test your entire trading strategy as a whole, or test individual components, right? Let's say you trade this specific trading plan like the following, right? Step 1 is you have a sweep of the Asian range on, let's say, the 5 minute. Um, Step 2 is a market structure shift on a lower time frame. Step 3 is entry from a fair value gap, and then you target 1 to 2 risk to reward, right? Um, Imagine that you have studied the market data and you know that this setup has worked, let's say, 60 times out of 100, right? So you have a 60% win rate. Now you're basically out of uncertainty and you know what to expect from the market, right? So to summarize, overcoming the fear of opening a position starts with building trust in your trading system first, right? Trust is built by conducting backtests, studying, the history of price movement. If you know the probability of your setup, you will reduce the uncertainty before future events, right? And fear usually stems from just the unknowing. Our brain can't process what's happening, so it's fearful, or our brain faces something that it perceives as a threat. So, and remember, uncertainty is also seen as a potential threat in our brain. Then, every time you avoid opening a position, you increase the chance of using the same behavior pattern in the future. So, to overcome fear, you have to face it and not avoid it at all costs, right? So, gradual and comfortable exposure to fear is used in cognitive behavioral therapy, and that's how you should start with. You should basically replace avoiding opening a position with opening a small, comfortable trade. And therefore, we will start the adaptation to fear. And then point 3, the last point we talked about is we often overestimate the probability of negative events due to fear and anxiety. And this sometimes makes us refrain from active actions, right? To prove ourselves that the irrationality of fears, we can use a table of expected and expected and actual anxiety, and that way we can show us ourselves that the experience is much less, or induces much less anxiety when we face the source of the fear than what it seems at first, right? And usually, this is something that could happen in other parts of life too, right? Let's say it's your fear of heights, right? If you're gonna stand on the top of a skyscraper, you're not gonna overcome that fear at once, right? It's gonna be probably a traumatic experience, and most likely next time you will never try to climb a skyscraper again and stand on the top, right? So in that case, you start with smaller, way lower buildings, and then you slowly but surely adapt to the fear of heights, right? And the same is done in trading. Let's see. Then I had a last slide, which is pretty simple. Let me change it back to the presentation. There we go. And that's basically ask me anything. So as I said, I want to use this second portion of the stream as like an open conversation. If anyone wants to share something, wants to ask a specific question, because I know we basically dived into a very specific fear and a very specific form of fear today, which is avoidance of opening trades because you're scared of losing. If there's anything or any specific situation that anyone would like me to go over, we can. And we'll pull up Trading View again, and we'll get my drawing skills back on the board, and we'll try and see if we can make something from it. So if anyone has something to share or any questions, just now's the time. Let's see. We'll switch back to the Trading View in the meantime. I see several people are typing, so I think we'll get some questions in. You think your biggest issue still is just sitting on those hands to wait for your setup? It's just a patience thing. Yeah, patience, same thing, man. You have to expose yourself to patience slowly and surely, and that's the only way you're gonna be able to increase it. Second thing is the whole bus stop story that I that I think I told a million times already. That you have to wait for the right bus and understand that basically all you're looking for and all you're having to do is wait for one specific thing in the market, and that's it. You just need your specific piece of the pie, and everything else is, should not be interesting to you. Not really a question, more so a confirmation. This was an epiphany for me 2 months ago. Journaled way better, showing the model actually works wonders. Yeah, and the fear prevented me from realizing more than 10 R that month. So now opening more trades again and no longer care or fear it. That's great to hear, man. That's great. Good to hear you had that experience. It's noise, yeah. Everything else that's not within your plan is basically, you could see it as noise because it shouldn't be interesting to you at all. Um, the brain values certainty over growth. The fear of loss is the subconscious choosing safety of the known, hesitation over the unknown outcome. Correct. That's exactly basically a core summary of what we've looked at today. The brain will always choose safety and survival over any risk that it has to take potentially. And it's hard to break the mindset too in this career. I agree. And personally, I think, at least that's my view on it, why I think it's so hard in this specific industry is because it's a very, very short feedback loop. That's A. And B, it's a very short feedback loop that has to do with money, right? Um, Money is such a psychologically heavy thing in our brain. And then we add the fact that we have such a short feedback loop, meaning that whenever something goes against our, um, the thing we'd like to experience, which would be profits, right? If anything goes against it, we get a immediate feedback, right? We see it right away. Let's say you have a more regular job. Let's say you work in a I don't know, in a marketing department or something, or you work, um, I don't know, anything, right? In a slightly more conventional job, usually it's you work a certain amount of hours, you complete work, and then at the end of the month, there's a compensation guaranteed on the other side, right? Which is usually salary or income. So the feedback loop is pretty long in the sense of it takes a lot of time and you'll still get a guaranteed result, right? But with this industry, if you do something wrong, you get punished for it immediately. If you do something right, you get rewarded for it also pretty much immediately. And even if you're doing something right, if you're very much attached to the money, it might feel like you're punished immediately too, right? What if fear doesn't grab in and the brain starts to over leverage without our control on the point of trade? Most of my problem is over leveraging and over trading, even when I'm not supposed to trade. How to solve that? Very good question. So, a large part of that, I like to view that kind of stuff, specifically this, from two perspectives, right? And the first is the biological perspective, what's happening inside the brain on a biological level that makes us do these things. And then two, I like to look at it from a more psychological slash spiritual kind of point of view. And I think personally, mixing the two helps you understand the behavioral patterns a lot better. So you said a large problem you have is over trading, right? Um, as I usually say, over trading is most likely not the problem itself. It's most likely the end result of a core problem, right? So if you overtrade, it's because of a specific reason, right? And the usual chain that's behind overtrading is something like, um, for example, a person uh, we'll say a person does wants to pass an account quickly. Wants to pass account quickly, right? Oh, that's not quickly. There we go. Right, they want to pass it quickly. That's one thing we should think about, right? And then we ask ourselves, okay, why do they want to pass it quickly, right? And it could be that they have a specific um, time pressure, in the sense of I need to do / make XYZ before ABC, right? Before a specific time, I need to do this, or I need to make this amount of money, all that kind of stuff, right? So that person wants to pass the account very quickly, or wants to take profits very quickly, wants to be profitable very quickly. And therefore, every loss feels from the initial goal, right? Initial, yeah. So it feels like a step back, right? Because it feels like you're doing something wrong, because you're basically taking a step back from the goal that you're trying to achieve, right? So our brain also understands the fact that taking a position, taking a trade, can lead to a potential reward, right? So it starts to make up for the loss or the traumatic experience that we have by basically triggering you to take another trade, because we know that the potential reward is behind it, right? Even though we know that it might not be the best option to take another trade, right? After we've taken 6 that were losses in a span of 30 minutes, for example, right? And I think a lot of people have had experienced something like that. Me too. Everyone had it. Um, Therefore, their brain starts to trick them into overtrading, because they feel like that's the option to get to their goal quicker, right? So let's see what Alex says. Yes, the feedback loop is difficult for me. I generally hit on average 30 handles a trade, but with profit rules, it requires me to size higher in order to meet payout requirements, and that's where I struggle the most, because trading with 1 to 2 micros wasn't enough, but it's where I should be. But trading with bigger sizing was detrimental to my psyche whenever I would lose. Yeah, that's what makes the prop game even harder, because you have specific rules that you need to adhere to, otherwise you're never going to get a payout. But at the same time, does it match with your psychological state? That's a very good question. And that's where that balance comes in, or it's very hard to balance, because you're basically getting pulled from two sides, and it's either you're not going to get paid out very quickly, or B, it's going to be you're going to ruin your mental state, right? So yeah, Johan, this is the more rational and biological thing that we talked about, right? And I go deeper, very deep into this in the earlier streams, where we basically talk about the paths our brain takes when making decisions in this stuff. So do check those out. And I think you were here in one of the earlier streams too. Um, and then there's the other part that you can explore, which is which is from, for example, a psychological perspective, right? So exploring the inner things in your mind, or that happen in your life, that may lead you to certain behaviors, that may lead to certain actions you take, right? And this is very, very case specific to everyone, of course. So, for example, um, I'm not sure if you've ever heard of Carl Jung, but he has some very interesting work about the part of a human being that everyone carries with it, that basically has a that basically represents the suppressed part of ourself, right? A repressed part, which he calls the shadow. And he says that the shadows is like a part of ourself that we repress or we deny it, but it surfaces in disguised ways. For example, In trading, it could be, for example, over leveraging, could be, for example, hidden greed, a hunger for power, or any need for significance, for example, right? Um, Over trading could stem from a very deep fear of missing out, an inability to tolerate any stillness or boredom, or maybe it's a desire to constantly prove yourself, right? Let's sketch a situation, right? Let's sketch a very specific situation, and this is not about a specific someone. It's just going to be a random hypothesis about a person that's a trader, right? Let's say we have a trader, and this trader wants to make it in trading, but has some a lot of responsibility on the side, right? Maybe he has a family, for example, right? He has a wife too, but the wife kind of doesn't really believe in the whole trading thing, right? She thinks, might be better if you just, do your normal work and not spend too much time on this trading. But the trader, the husband, he really believes in himself and he really thinks that he can make it in trading, right? So because of that dynamic, inherently has a kind of a desire to prove to his family, to his wife, to himself that he can make it, right? So this is like a very deep rooted desire of him, right? To make it in trading because that way he can prove to himself and to his wife and to his whole family and everyone around him that he did make it, right? That he was the person that could make it work. And that can kind of fuel over trading in a way, right? Because trading will actually activate that shadow part of himself, right? Because it's trading is basically a mirror of the psyche, right? Um, let's see. Another thing we often lose sight of as traders is the value of money. We grow thick skin and are comfortable losing $1,000 in a trade, thinking of like this. Imagine you make $4,000 a month. You're saying you're comfortable working for free this week. That's a real gut punch. Yeah, true. Yeah, goes, and that's also a good part. Interesting thing to say, indeed. If props offer large discounts and you frame it as, oh, it's cheap this way, it might already set you off to a bad start for sure. It's a good thing to think about. I really haven't even thought of that before, honestly. Yeah, it's just $50, and then it's more. And then also some other way, um, it often happens from this perspective, right? When we look at this psychological perspective, is someone might have a very, very deep desire to be super structured, to be the stone cold specialist trader that does everything in his system perfectly and that journals every day and the basically uh, the professional trader that we dream of being, right? Someone might have a very deep desire to be that person, right? And usually a lot of traders are in that stage when they first start an account, right? Because when they get a new trading account, a new prop firm account, what happens is they tell themselves, it's a new fresh start. Now I'm going to be journaling this from now on. I'm going to make sure to follow all the rules on this fresh account. I'm going to be doing this, that, all the stuff the perfect trader does, right? And they tell themselves that because they've started a new trading account, basically, right? And now what ends up happening is they ruin it again, right? They slowly digest or they slowly deviate from all the good behaviors they've told themselves they're going to do, right? And then suddenly they blow the account again because they have strayed away from all those good behaviors, right? But now you might say, how does it work with blowing your account suddenly, right? Why does that, or how does the whole shadow part fit in with that, right? Well, it's basically because that deep desire to be that good trader will fuel someone, and we know that the brain also has the connection with understanding when that person is that perfect trader, which is in the first phase after a new account, right? Because we have a fresh start, quote unquote. Um, so we'll basically push our body or push ourselves to blow the accounts again, so we get into that headspace and at first start again and again and again and again, right? What's up, athlete? Hope all is well. You're a legend too. I think that's why I see being a trader, most have to have a optimist mindset because this isn't for the weak-minded. Yeah, I think trading is a pretty heavy thing or pretty heavy job or industry for the mental state for sure. It's very different and not really comparable to a lot of the things on this planet. Honestly, one of the things that does have a lot of things in common is poker, professional poker, honestly. You have the same thing with risk management, you have the same thing with the psychology of the money and all that kind of stuff. I think that comes pretty close. Other than that, there's not a lot of things. Let's see. It's a good explanation. Thank you, man. I hope, yeah, I'm glad I could provide some value with that. Um, yeah, it's still tough with the mindset, but you're able to continue to push through and fight through the setbacks. Yeah, exactly. And it will help you see a side of you that you never existed. Yeah, honestly, it's a very interesting thing to view everything from. At least I think that it's a very interesting way to look at it from two perspectives, which is a the uh the specific biological part, and then at the other part it's uh, the whole Carl Jung or psychological part. If you combine it, you'll basically get a very, very deep insight into your own brain. What's the WSOP? I have no idea what that is. Oh, World Series of Poker. Ah, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course. Yeah, yeah. Funny, right? If you're very good at poker, you get the chance to even uh get to work in quant trading. That's true. Yeah, I've heard about that. Because it's like I said, it's probably the industry that's most close to it to us. As I think. Yeah, risk management and probabilities. Those two are very important. Let's see. Well, Gozen, that's an important thing for you to figure out. Where does the greed and FOMO come from, right? And that's what Collier calls shadow work. We're basically um digging very, very deep into your own mind and exploring everything that happened that could have shaped you the way you are. And this could be everything from daily exposure to certain things to childhood stuff to everything, right? And all that kind of stuff has shaped you in a way, and sometimes make sure some type of behavior is very, very deeply rooted. Let's see if we have some final questions before we'll round up the stream. Let's see. Does anyone have a specific thing they want to ask? To remove that doubt when you have a loss. Yeah, basically the thing we should all acknowledge and strive to get at is the point where we understand that the outcome of a trade does not matter at all. It's of no significance at all. It's not important. All that counts is the system behind it. That's the only thing that's important. And then the amount or the results of a large pool of trades. That's important. So a single trade won't define our profitability or unprofitability. You know, it's just the outcome of a single variable. That's it. So when in doubt, zoom out, of course, right? Throttle out. Yeah, exactly. Checks with your PFP. Yeah. All right. Let's see. I don't think there's any more specific. Oh, today during London, you got feared for a lot of seconds because stop losses have not been working. During I left was already a lot in the red. I was not at the desk for some time and just closed it without understanding why it happened. Later, I knew why. A newbie would have doubted everything. Yeah, but it was today was also specifically that there were like some platform issues, right? So it's not weird that you experience uh any fear because it's uncertainty at that point. If there's platform issues, you should know what's gonna happen. Because I think there were some issues with limit orders on Project X, from what I know. So that might also be why. Let's see. I think there's no more other questions, so we'll leave it at this. Um, so yeah, I want to thank everyone for showing up. Really appreciate that everyone took the time of their day to be here. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I hope you learned something today. And I will make sure to. This was all the 4 parts that I had prepared for the trading psychology series. But if there's any interest, I'd say I will make sure to create more parts and do some more research, and we can basically look at some more specific cases like we did today. So we'll look at over leveraging, over trading, and all that kind of interesting stuff because I think there's still a lot of people that experience that, of course. So we'll look at that in the next psychology series or next psychology episode. So yeah,